Greetings and salutations. As some of you may know, I made some major reshuffling of my schedule because I was very sick last month. So as a result, the episode numbers are a little off because I record things when the author and I are available rather than directly before they come out. So, Lori does make a comment about this being the 58th episode, so I needed to do this little intro caveat so you would understand why. Welcome to the 63rd episode of The Liz McMullen Show. My guest is Lori L. Lake, and I'm so happy to have her on again. Welcome back to the show, Lori.
Thank you. Episode 58, you've done a lot of these.
I know. Now that I started doing 2 episodes a week in, I think, May or something. So that means every year I do 100 episodes.
You're amazing.
It's a lot of, it's so funny. I read probably about 150 books a year for the show.
That's amazing, too.
I know, it's mind-blowing, which is the reason why I have to keep notes at my side. The first
you
book...
can read 150 books, and you can also do, 58 shows and all the Lizzie's bedtime stories. How come I can't write 150 books?
I just don't know. And on top of that, I've added author to my list of things that I'm doing. I'm revising a manuscript, and a lot of it I've written, I think, about 30 new pages because I originally started writing this book about 5 years ago, and I put it aside and then decided to pick it up again. And so now I'm having the interesting experience of taking what my writing style and tone is now and blending it with the stuff that I had written so long ago. And it's a bumpy ride. I'm only just starting to get some stuff. I'm deleting things left and right and writing new scenes. And so I need to get the first blocked out draft done, and then I can start tightening the winch, so to speak, to make it have those twists and turns, to have the spooky things that happen in there resonate and fit. So it's that on top of doing the recordings, reading the books, producing the shows. It's a very busy life. Oh, and I'm on the GCLS. The writing program is being developed, and I'm on the team that's working on putting it together and the curriculum and whatnot. And I am the administrator for the mentoring program.
That's great. And you also have a life.
Yeah, I have a new puppy, and I have a partner, and a family, and a cute niece. Yes.
Busy life.
Yes. So I was like, I'm talking too much. I forgot. You're my focus. So in the first book that I want to talk about is Like Lovers Do, and what inspired this book?
Well, Pat Cronin, who's a writer, she wrote Soul's Rescue, also known as Patty Schramm. She kept telling me she wanted me to write an erotica piece for Women in Uniform, which was a collection that she had a bunch of pieces for. And I kept saying, no. And then finally she said, please, you just have to do this. You need to write this. You don't write real erotic kind of stuff yourself, and you should give this a try, Lori. And I said, okay, I'll do it on 2 conditions. 1, the piece can be as long as I want it to be. And 2, it's not a wham bam, thank you, ma'am. I'll have some character development. Mm-hmm. And she said, okay. So I don't know how long the piece turned out to be, in 4,000 or 5,000 words, whatever, but it was this big long chunk about Kenny and Lily, and it ends after they've had this wonderful, loving, sexy night, and it's erotica, kind of. Well, then what happened was I could not forget about them. Uh-huh. They stuck in my head. I liked both of those characters, and so I asked myself this question: what would happen if the very day after Kenny's completely in love and everything has all come together with the 2 of them, if Lily's old girlfriend, with whom she had a lot of unfinished business, if she came back into the picture, what would happen then? And I sat down and started writing, and I wrote the book between June 20th and July 30th, and in 50 days, And I only wrote 39 of those days, but in those 39 days, that book poured out of me. The whole rest of it just poured out of me. I'd never had that happen quite like that before. So that's how that book came about, and it sort of just came out of my consciousness like crazy.
So would you consider yourself a pantser then, or were you outlining as well?
Oh, heck no outlining. I can never. If I outline, something perverse in me, not perverted, but something obtuse in me just says, hey, that's not going to work. We're going a different direction. I can't outline.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't work for me. I can outline after I've written something.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where it's going half the time. I just write and the characters take me along for the ride.
What kind of characters, what are your favorite characters in the books that you write?
I often fall in love with secondary characters and have to control myself because I like them so well, and they become their own people that I just love them. Like Max in Like Lovers Do. I just really came to love that kid, and I could see myself doing a story about her. I've always said that the two little old ladies in Ricochet and Time, which was my very first book, Esteline and Ruth, I've always wanted to write their own book because I just was so entranced with those two characters. But your secondary characters have to really support the plot and your main characters. Mm-hmm. So it's not like you can really go to town so much with the secondary characters, even if it's all.
Yeah, because they can run away with the plot and kind of take the book in a different direction. Could you give a brief synopsis of Like Lovers Do?
Well, Kenny is not very well recovered from the death of her previous girlfriend, and she's kind of unmoored at the moment, and she's come into some insurance money, and she came from some money, and so she buys herself an apartment complex in it's an Arms. It's one of those big buildings that's got 10, 12 apartments in it, 4 stories, and it's an old brick kind of thing in the Laurelhurst district in Portland. And she doesn't really want anybody to know she's the owner. She just goes to work there, and she's working on apartments, and she's just sort of aimless. But in the 4th floor, in the penthouse, a very, very classy, extremely well thought of artist named Lily. She lives up there, and she seems kind of unattainable. And Kenny's kind of interested in her, but not really, because she's still kind of floating along, not knowing where she's going. And when the two of them get together and things start popping between them, it like brings Kenny back to life. Mm-hmm. And then things go terribly wrong. And that's what the bulk of the book is about. What goes terribly wrong, and can it be fixed?
Yeah. You know, starting a relationship or even just being intimate with somebody, especially to the level and intensity of Lily and Kenny being together, that it requires a leap of faith. And I don't know if it's just because we're women, but I find that we fall faster and harder. And so when there was an unexpected twist after their night together, I was so worried for Kenny because she made this huge step of reaching out and going on, a date and giving herself to this woman, and it did not end the way she was hoping it would end.
No, it really didn't. And the idea of what do you do when that happens? How do you maintain your integrity? How do you see this person periodically? Because, she lives there. She comes up and down the stairs. Kenny's working in the main hallway there. She's kind of being security and management. And what do you do if you see someone who you've pretty much fallen in love with and then they've let you down that way? And I had an interesting time dealing with that, thinking about that and trying to help Kenny, my character, trying to help her deal with all of that. I've had broken heart myself, and I know what it's like to go through that and how hard it is.
So I felt bad because, normally when something goes awry, you can kind of withdraw from wherever you have shared connection, and like lick your wounds and kind of work through it. And given where she lives in where her apartment is, and that she would be working the desk and whatnot, she could not escape her. And I felt so bad. I was like, you poor thing.
Well, she had a lot of things that she had attempted to escape, and in a way, the situation with Lily forced her hand. She had to deal with old family issues. She had to deal with old grief. She had to deal with the way she had disconnected herself from other people. She tried to organize her life so that she didn't have to deal with real people and real intimacy. So you're right when you said she took a leap to get involved with Lily. She did. And that didn't go well, and she could have taken another leap right into the bottle like her aunt did, or she could have done a lot of other things, but somehow or other that cracked her open in a way that she had to go out into the world and figure out another way to handle things. And her connection with Max, the young runaway that she befriends, that was a big piece, I think.
Yeah, I definitely think it was a bridge and helped her to grow. One of the things that occurred to me when I was reading the book is where social class and people, the haves and the have-nots, and the way that she was treated before they knew that she owned the property, and then the way that they treated Kenny after they knew she had the property. And I thought it was a very telling contrast to show what happened in those two different contexts.
I think that's interesting too, because that happens in a lot of places in our lives where people don't think, you go to the grocery store and you're walking around in your grubbies and you run into somebody and you talk with them and maybe they don't think much of you, and then they find out that you're an award-winning real estate developer or that you're a pro athlete or something like that, and then people act all different. But, it's like, how do people relate to each other on the bottom level? Just, two people who are just standing there talking about stuff. Shouldn't have social strata involved. It shouldn't have, hey, I'm better than you because I've got a Nike shoe line or something like that. It doesn't seem fair.
When you're creating characters, what do you find you are attracted to? What core traits are things that you like to see in your protagonists?
Well, in a protagonist, I'm looking for somebody who is trying to learn and grow, basically. And lots of times they've resisted it, and something is happening in their life. Somebody made the comment a long time ago, and it's stuck in my head about a really good plot is one where terrible trouble is visiting your protagonist. And that terrible trouble is the thing that moves that person forward to grow, to change, to take chances, to become a better human being. I got to admit, I'm not one of these people who can write a book where at the end the person is like less than, that they're a worse human being, they're some sort of odious character to start with, and at the end they're still an odious character. I want people to be happier, or even if bad things have happened, like in Snow Moon Rising, where bad things happen and lots of people died in World War II, still the characters who survive all of that come out and they're better people. They've learned to love. They've learned to be more accessible to the people who they love in their lives. So as far as my protagonists go, I just want to see them be active. I don't want to see them to be passive, kind of boring, woe is me kind of people. Even when they're complaining about what's gone on in their lives, even when they're unhappy, even when terrible troubles have hit their even when that's happened, I want them to still have some modicum of hope and some persistence and tenacity and going after something different. That's what makes a plot interesting. Nobody wants to read about the character who just sits there like who is it in Winnie the Pooh? Somebody stole my tail. Eeyore. You don't want an Eeyore. Usually a secondary character.
Have you ever written a story with an anti-hero in it?
With a what hero?
An anti-hero, like someone who you would more likely perceive to be an the bad guy, but ends up being a good guy underneath.
I'm actually working on a series right now that's a spin-off of the next gun book. The next gun book is called Gunpoint. It's the 5th book in the series, and the character that's in there is a returned from Afghanistan soldier. And she's kind of, in the series I'm planning for her, she's an anti-hero in a lot of ways because she's doing a lot of things illegally, but she's doing them for a good reason. As far as otherwise, I'm not sure I've done any real anti-heroes that were protagonists. I've done some secondary characters.
You know, I tend to like books that have strong women who are imperfect and vulnerable. And one of the characteristics of those plots that I like the most are what I consider redemption, tales of redemption.
Yeah.
And I like those characters who believe that they're so incredibly unlovable and that the evil, awful things that they've done have ruined them for life, that there's no turning around for that. Like Jove Bell's Chaps had a drug cartel enforcer. She, broke legs and shot people who crossed her boss, who was like a drug kingpin. And then she decides to split and go on the lam and have her own life. And she meets somebody and decides that there's no way that anything can happen between them because she's such an awful person, and there's no matter how many nice things she does, there's no redemption for her. And eventually, of course, there is, because that's the way happy endings work. But I like watching the character grow through a book, whether they were a mercenary or an assassin or a spy or, an enforcer. I like seeing that. I like seeing them find hope in an area where they felt that their lives were unredeemable.
One of my favorite books that fits that, what you're just describing, did you ever read Sharon Bauer's book, Lucifer Rising?
No, I haven't.
Oh, I should send you that because just ran across it again, and it's one of those books that had a real effect on me. I bet I read it 10 or 12 years ago, and I still remember the plot of it, if not everybody's names, but I still remember how powerful that was and how you can have a character who has done some really bad things and caused bad things to happen, but they are redeemable. Mm-hmm. And what do they do to redeem themselves? I like that too.
Yeah, Kim Baldwin has a lot of different characters that are, from
Hunter's Pursuit.
Yeah, Hunter's Pursuit.
I love that book. That was a great book.
That was fantastic. That was just, and to think so much of it occurred in a bunker in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
But it was just so well written, and there are masks that everybody wears in real life. Not everybody's a dashing, strong, swashbuckling hero. But I found that sometimes we put on masks or we have fronts or what people see, and then underneath there usually is the better stuff, whereas in most cases people assume that masks are the sign of somebody with poor character.
Yeah, I don't know that's always necessarily true. It might be the opposite, that the people who are wearing the masks could actually be wearing them for a perfectly good reason, to try to be a good citizen, to be a good parent.
Like a superhero.
Yeah, perhaps. Who's your favorite superhero?
Who's my favorite superhero? I like Spider-Man. Mm-hmm. I like how he was kind of a geeky, weak kid, and then was bitten and got all those different powers. But I don't think I'm a big superhero person. I'm more into the action adventure things, like the Bourne Identity and Bond, James Bond, kind of
Do you
stuff.
like action and twists and intrigue and mystery?
I like when somebody surprises me, actually. When
Okay.
you're preparing yourself to write a book that has detectives in it or has law enforcement individuals, what kind of research do you do in order to be prepared to paint a field? Because if well enough that if cops read it, they're like, this is on point.
Well, one of the things is to have some police officers who are friends and other people in law enforcement. I read a book several years ago that was about an FBI agent, and it was really clear that the writer had done no research other than watching some FBI show on TV, because everything about procedure, everything about the way that whole FBI world was put together was just completely inaccurate. And for somebody who has done any studying at all, has read any books on procedure and on the law enforcement mindset, if you read a book like that, you just want to throw it across the room because it isn't plausible at all. So it's important to me that I go on ride-alongs and that I talk to police officers and I keep up with some of the different things that are going on. I've got a bunch of different things like the Force Science News that Lynette May sent me, where I find out about some of the new things that are happening that have to do with technology. And I have a friend, Lee Laughlin, who is a retired FBI agent, and he was a detective and just a police officer for years. And he's a good guy to check in with. And just if you do scenes, you're writing scenes that are action or that are happening in a police office, wherever, you kind of have to run them by people, have beta readers or have somebody who knows that it's not like on Special Victims Unit. That's not realistic. Some of the stuff that happens there just isn't realistic. And so that's what I'm trying to do, is to make it as realistic as possible, because the highest praise I can get, in my humble opinion, is when someone who has worked in law enforcement says, I read your book and I liked it because you got it right. You did a good job of showing how cops really are, and you didn't do anything so crazy that it didn't seem plausible. So that matters to me. Although I have had people write me and talk about, well, why did this happen this way? Why didn't you just have the character do X, Y, or Z? And was like, well, that's not how it works in the real world. So I think sometimes you have to balance what's fictional necessity, with what is reality. And I think sometimes you can do a little bit of hedging on that. But I don't want to go so far off into left field that I'm having police officers do things like, anytime a police officer is investigating the death of a relative, that's just never going to happen. They'd be banned from that investigation. And that was one of the things that happens in Jump the Gun, is how close are they going to let Des Riley get to the investigation that comes up? Because she was a colleague with the police officer who got killed. But you're going to have cops who were colleagues investigate the murder of a colleague. So, and it wasn't like it was a relative or anything like that, but they did try to keep people out of situations where you shouldn't be involved in it because you're biased. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a way that I looked at it.
As an author, do you write the books that you like to read, not your personal books, but the genre that you like to read yourself?
Yes and no. I've always had a real affinity for mystery, thriller, intrigue. I've always loved books like that. But I also write romances, and I do like romances, but I don't read nearly as many romances as I do mystery. Mm-hmm. And I've never written in the realm that is kind of my little secret guilty pleasure. Mm-hmm. I like to read military sci-fi. I like to read, space opera kind of things where you've got a woman on a ship and she's trying to deal with aliens that come on board, or maybe they're dealing with just fighting wars on some planet or something like that. And I like the Ripley kind of character that was in the Alien movies. Mm-hmm. I like it when you've got a group of people who are a team and they're they're sort of military related, and they go into some place and they've got to work together. And, lots of times they happen to get decimated, and this lone woman has to go in there and do things that she might not have been trained to do. So that's a whole area. I've not written anything. I've not published anything in another area that I love to read, which is about post-apocalyptic fiction. I read a ton of that because it's kind of got its own mystery, thriller, kind of intrigue side to it. And I've read all of the seminal works in that whole realm, Alas, Babylon, and the Rift, and all these older books that came out, I Am Legend, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And now I love that lesbians are starting to. Mary Griggs just had a book come out a year or so ago where she's examining a kind of post-apocalyptic world. And I'm not so interested in necessarily the zombie angle of all of it, but, the power and energy and everything going to hell in a handbasket. That's really interesting to me because then you're testing humans and their ability to work together and their guts and gumption and who's going to give up and who's going to persist, who's going to try to make it. And so I've been working on a novel called Isolation 2020, and now it's probably going to have to be called 2320 or something like that because it's practically 2020 now. But I've been working on this novel for a long time, and it's pretty much turned into what looks like it'll be at least 3 books. It's a big sprawling thing, and I don't know when I'll get that one done, but I work on it every so often when I can. And so in answer to your question, there's some things that I'm writing that I do read a lot of, and some things that I read a lot of that I haven't actually published anything yet. But I hope to be writing for like 40 more years and that I can write everything that I would ever want to write.
Now that is the cool stuff right there. So when it comes to space operas and whatnot, Andy Marquette is fantastic at that. My favorite author who does I think it's called the Supreme Constellation series, and it's by Gunn Brooke.
Oh, Gunn, yeah.
One of the things I find fascinating about sci-fi futuristic stuff are all the different technologies that they use. From like they had these special instruments or whatever that would help to knit muscle and skin back together and help things heal much faster than would ever be possible with our medicine, and interaction with alien species and the different characteristics that they have. So
that's great.
Yeah, I love that kind of stuff. So what's one of your all-time favorite mystery thriller books? And this can obviously be mainstream as well.
Well, a mainstream author that I absolutely adore is Marcia Muller. Mm-hmm. And she's been writing the Sharon McCone series. She wrote the very first hard-boiled female detective. Back in 1977, her first book came out. She beat Sue Grafton and Sarah Paretsky, whose characters came out in 1982. So she beat them by 5 years with her first book, Edwin of the Iron Shoes, I think is what it was called. She's written about 30 books in this series now, and I just love the Sharon McCone series. I love how Sharon started out this kind of innocent and idealistic person working for this All Souls collective as an investigator. And over the years, she's hardened up and toughened up in a lot of ways. And she's had to shoot people, and she's had all kinds of terrible things happen, and people she's loved have died. And it's been this whole life that she's had. And I really enjoyed reading that. If I picked my favorite book of all time that one of our lesbian mystery writers has written, I would have to say The Iron Girl by Ellen Hart. I absolutely loved that book. I thought that was one of the best books ever. One of those ones that's on my shelf for me to wait 3 or 4 or 5 years, and then I can take it out again because I'll hopefully have forgotten enough of it that I could read it again fresh because it was just so good. So those are a couple of my favorites. In this last year or two, I haven't had very much time to read as much as I'd like to. So I'm way behind on everything. And then we have this amazing explosion of lesbian publishing going on. Because I used to be able to go and buy all the lesbian books that came out in every genre. 15, 20 years ago, you ordered your 70 or 80 books and hey, you had them all. Well, now it's like 600, 700, 800 books coming out, all of different styles, different genres, different qualities of writing too, because I'm also seeing lesbian writers coming to the forefront, some of whom have great writing skills and some of them who are learning. And people are actually able to learn in the publishing process. Mm-hmm. Kind of an interesting whole thing. I mean, I just read something R.E. Bradshaw, Becky Bradshaw wrote on one of the lists, discussion lists. It might have been the virtual living room, where she was just saying she put together this first book and she was a pretty good writer and she put it out there, but it had some typos and it needed some proofreading, and she put it out there, and people who read it in ebook form wrote her back and said, hey, this isn't good enough. You can do better than this. And she learned a whole lot from that whole process, and she's been able to go on and continue to be every book a better book, every book more carefully crafted. And I got to say, that happened to me too. My first couple of books, I was lucky that I got to do second editions of them, because I was learning how to write back in the early days during the course of publishing too. So I'm still learning new things all the time, as I read things and as I write and as I edit and as other people comment on my books. And I keep trying to incorporate better writing practices everywhere I can.
So if you had some advice for aspiring authors and new authors, what would be some of the things you'd like to tell them?
Well, I think the first thing is that it is important to write with abandon at first, because you can get all hung up if you don't play, if you don't write the book with excitement and joy and glee. But then you have to be able to step back from it and decide what needs to be done to this book. Do I need to reorganize it? Do I need somebody to read it and help me with my writing skills, all the way down to the sentence structure. Sometimes there's sentence and paragraph issues people have, and that's when you can learn. But when you first start writing, you should do it for fun. It should be a challenge, but it should also be something that fills your soul, that lifts you up. Mm-hmm. And then the thing that happens so often is, after that time is over and you are trying to do the editing and revising of a book, it's really hard to let go of it, because if you put something together and you did it with joy and abandon, mm-hmm. And then other people come along and say, hey, well, this doesn't work because there's cause and effect, and you got the effect first and then the cause. You need to switch this stuff. And it's hard. It's hard sometimes to hear, and I wrote this so fast that, you're right, I probably did jumble up this action scene a little bit, and I probably do have to order it a little bit, and okay, I'll learn some more skills on how to do it. But if you don't have something on the page to work on, that's like trying to learn how to swim when you don't have a pool. Uh-huh. You kind of have to have something down on the page so that you can learn from that.
Yeah, I recently published a story on Amazon, and I had one reader contact me and show me that there was a continuity error. And the beautiful thing about ebooks and also self-publishing is I was able to correct the error, which I said, thank you so much for telling me. That's so wonderful. And then yesterday I got a note where she's like, I'm confused. I thought they already got out of the pool. How could she be taking her out again? And the reason why that was there was I had a beta reader who said to me, this is the things that you have happening here would not be comfortable and would not be the way that would work out best. I was like, okay, I'll switch that up and change it. But I had not realized that I didn't switch everything. So I went in last night. I was like, oh my goodness, she's not lifting her out of the pool. She's lifting her, from the chase lounge. But I was so thrilled that somebody told me that, because I rather somebody contact me and tell me about the mistakes that I've made than to have work out there with those imperfections. Obviously nothing's going to be ironclad and perfect, but I'd like to get pretty as close as I can within the skill level that I have, which is I'm a beginner.
Well, and that's a good attitude to have, because if you're willing to make changes, and if we're humble and lovable enough to say, yeah, you know, I'm not perfect, and oh crap. I remember a reader who wrote to me and said, is it my imagination, or is in the first book of Gunshy, like in the first few pages she has long sleeves on, and then the last part of it she has short sleeves on in her uniform. And I went back and looked at it, and it's like, crap, you know, now it's in print. It's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's nothing I can do about it except for fix it in the second edition. I keep a list, I still do this, kept a list of where there were errors, and I can correct ebook stuff, but I can't correct the print version. So if you've made a mistake, you just have to say, well, that's the way it goes, and carry on. Ellen Hart always told this funny story about how in one of her books, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago, one of the Jane Lawless books, she said she put a Corvette in the book. And there was a crash, and the metal all bent, and there was, you know, the sound of twisted metal or something like that. Well, the readers started writing right off the bat saying, Corvettes are made of fiberglass. There's no metal there. How was she to know? That's just the thing that happens sometimes, is there's some detail you didn't even know to research.
Yeah, so I wouldn't know that either, actually.
Yeah, that's the second piece of advice that I would give writers, especially aspiring writers, but also any writer. And the second piece of advice is this. Find your most picky, most cranky, most deliberately precise friend and have them read the book. Find your worst enemy who hates you. Have them read the book, because they're going to find every little thing that you did wrong and point all this stuff out to you. And even though it's very irritating and sometimes even painful to hear, we need to hear it. If there's a continuity error, if you'd had somebody read that and they said, hey, this is a continuity thing, well, even if they said it in a mean way, hey, dummy, you did this stupid thing, well, still you have time to fix it. And that's important. So having readers who are picky is a good thing. Yeah,
for me, because I'm writing and revising what will be my debut novel, my philosophy is with the beta readers that I have lined up is I'd rather take it in the chin from a tough beta reader than get a bad review.
That's totally true. You don't want to get the reputation of being a sloppy writer.
Exactly.
Because when I teach, this is the thing that I try to talk about, is the whole idea that you're trying to get the reader into this dreamlike flow where they suspended disbelief because of the way you set everything up, and they're reading along with you, and nothing is interrupting their experience of the story. And the minute something happens that is bad writing, or that is a continuity error, or is some kind of a problem that jerks them out of the story, it ruins the flow. And then you've got to get that reader back. There are some people who, when that happens to them, they just put the book down and they don't keep reading. And you don't want that. You want people to keep on reading as best as possible, even if you've made some minor errors. You want them all to be minor errors, not big old major things.
Yeah, not big honking errors. And you know, my book's is a paranormal cusping on horror. So I've chosen different people who write that kind of writing to look at it. But I've also asked people who are not fans or not familiar with that particular genre to give me their opinion as well, because to me, in order to cut and craft and polish the story, you really do have to have these divergent people looking at it, not just for the end game as to what the readers are going to feel about it, but to really learn how to write.
Right. You set yourself up for a real hard job there, too, because you're writing in a specific genre, and there's certain expectations in that genre. And some of that might be surprise, in effective obfuscation, where you're going along and you're leading them down one path, and then something happens to make people realize, oh, this isn't what it was at all. Twists and turns that occur, and that sort of thing sometimes you have to be very deliberate about it and know that you're doing that.
Mm-hmm.
But it isn't always that easy when you're trying to write the story, because this is another thing I tell students. We're carrying the story and the scene and the characters in our head, and we're writing it all down as best as we can. And what we're seeing in our head, we're seeing on the page, even though we didn't write it on the page.
Mm-hmm.
So lots of times someone will read something and they'll go, well, where the heck are these people? Oh, well, they're in a small room. Well, yeah, you mentioned it was dark, but you didn't really say, are they in a house? Or where is this room? On a space station? Where? Oh, yeah, I forgot. I guess I had it in mind that that's where it was, but I didn't put it on the page. And that's the kind of thing that it's good to have readers who aren't experienced in your genre.
Mm-hmm.
When they read something, they're going along and they're like, yeah, this romance thing, where'd this third arm come from? How exactly did that person reach there? I'd like to know. Or other kinds of things and mysteries. It's fun when you have somebody who's not really a mystery reader and they go along and they're like, what's the deal with this person? And didn't you talk about this gun earlier? And, now they've lost the gun. What happened to the gun? You realize, oh, okay, I had this red herring that I was using and it's not working effectively.
Mm-hmm.
So then you know to rewrite. And it's not easy, though.
One of
We get immersed.
One of the more amusing, Joe Bell helped me edit my story, and one of the more amusing things that she told me is like, I know you don't mean for this person to sound, narcissistic or conceited, but it's not giving your readers the idea that you want to give them. And I was like, oh my God. And she said, yes, it's a point of view thing. She can't think of herself about, how studly her body is and whatnot, and how awesome she looks. And it's like, oh, okay. I have to realize that all the things that I'm saying have to be from the point of view of that particular character. That particular character can assess themselves in a mirror, or make decisions on what they're going to wear, or see the room that if they're in like a grand ballroom, or if they're in the woods or in the middle of a crime scene. All of these things are from the perspective of that particular character. And whenever you kind of head hop and switch into the perspective of another character, or even say things that, that don't come under that purview, because my point in the first place was to, paint a picture of what exactly this particular character looks like, and also describe the setting within which the story happens. And I didn't realize the way that I was adding those details didn't come off the way that I wanted them to.
Are you writing in first person or third person?
Third person.
Okay, so you have a whole lot of room to do some objective description where it is kind of from the outside of the character, but the minute you go into that character's head, I can see what your beta reader is saying, because you're right. You just can't say, whoa, don't I look studly today? Or you start sounding like Ted Baxter on the old Mary Tyler Moore show, or somebody who's one of our more stuck-up characters in TV or books or whatever. I get what they were saying to you. So how did you fix the problem?
I took out the details that didn't involve her physique. It was more about choosing what she was going to wear, looking at herself in the mirror, making sure like nothing was out of place. But my ultimate goal was for the reader to find this character appealing and sexy and want to be and interact with her. And she was not vain or conceited or narcissistic. And so I'm glad that my beta reader told me about how it comes off, because I was totally missing the boat. And also what was in my head and how I pictured things did not show up in the page the way that I wanted it to.
That's interesting how that happens. One thing that I've discovered is sometimes what you've got to do is have the commentary or the observations come from someone outside the character. Mm-hmm. So they can have like a discussion, and somebody walks up to your character and says, well, you're looking pretty dang hot today. You're so lucky you've got those great legs. And then the character says, oh, please, stop talking about my legs. And then the friend says, but really, look, look at the muscle, you're like a rock. You can have this kind of discussion go back and forth, and your character can be embarrassed by it, or can be, I don't know, try to be realistic about it, or downplay it a little bit. And then she doesn't seem like she's narcissistic at all. She seems like she has her own viewpoint on her physique, and the other person is finding her attractive. So we, the readers, also find her attractive. And I use that a lot.
There's, and the other thing is, these are other traits that characters have. Let's say you have a character that is brilliant, has an incisive mind, and really can, let's say as a cop, can look at a crime scene and see these minute clues and be able to bind them all together and figure out who the killer is or who the criminal is and track them down and make it happen. Because I'm always fascinated that people can track these things down and stop serial killers and whatnot. But you could very easily write it in a way that sounds like, I'm so damn smart. I know how all of this works. It's amazing how my mind put things together.
My name is Mr. Peabody. Remember him from the Underdog, Mr. Peabody and Underdog cartoon? I'm dating myself in a big way. But yeah, the kind of the nerd sort of person who is, they've got all the answers to everything, but they're not very interesting because they don't suffer really.
But, ultimately we want to design robust characters and have well thought out plots. And for me, as a reader, I love when I get surprised. I love when not only something unexpected happens, that I completely miss that it's a feint or a misdirection until I discover that, whatever the thing is, was it an error that, was this person really the person who was a serial killer? Was it the mother who did this to her son or whatever? And it's like, no, it's somebody completely unrelated. And that's what I like about watching true crime and mystery shows. I like seeing the real life plot twists and turns.
Yeah, sometimes real life can be very much like a novel. And then sometimes if you wrote the true life plot down on paper, it wouldn't be very interesting, because a lot of what detectives have said to me is that really police work is a lot of plodding, literally plodding from place to place and literally plodding through paperwork and talking to people. And some of it is really very slow, and it's not the kind of thing that you really can write in a novel and make it all that interesting. So there's in mysteries anyway, there's sort of an art to giving out a certain number of clues periodically as you're going along and keeping the investigator moving. Some of the worst mysteries that I've read are ones where all the investigator does is just goes and talks to this person, gets some information, goes and talks to that person, gets some information. And that's all it is. It's just chat. And now let's all gather in the drawing room and I'll point out the person who was the killer. That's kind of an old way that they used to do mystery novels, and it's not very interesting these days.
When did you start writing?
When did I start publishing or writing?
Writing.
When I was 26, I started writing short stories, 25 or 26. I started writing short stories and sending them around and trying to get them published. And I have over 100 rejection letters, some of them very encouraging. And toward the very end of that whole process, over 15 years, I was trying to get short stories published. Because, in the olden days, back in the 80s, into the early 90s, there were journals all over the place. There were all kinds of different magazines that took fiction, and it's different than it is today. Nowadays, a lot of that you find online, or there's really only a couple of magazines left anymore. Ellery Queen for mysteries, for instance, or there's a couple of Asimov's sci-fi ones, but there's just not as much published stuff anymore as there used to be. But I kept working at it, and finally, I remember it was 1992, I had been trying to find lesbian novels that interested me, and just wasn't finding a whole lot. Everything seemed like you just barely got into it and was over. really short books, and I wanted big, heavy-duty books like I'd read. Somewhere along the way, I read Jennifer Levin's book, The Sea of Light, a big, meaty, long, complicated sort of a novel, and I really liked that novel. And so then I decided I would start a novel myself, kind of a romance, starts with a hate crime happening at the beginning, so that's not very romantic, but Ricochet in Time was the name of that book. I was trying to write a book like I wanted to read, something a little longer and more to it, more characters, and so I finally did 1990, I think it was somewhere in the early 90s, I got an acceptance for a story that I had written for a lesbian magazine, and it was going to come out like in 6 months, and before it came out, the magazine folded. So I never actually got a short story published after all that time and energy. And but I did get I did finally get a novel published. So it took me a long time. It took me quite a while. I considered myself an apprentice to the craft for about 15 years. It took me 15 years of writing and working and learning stuff and taking some classes and just trying. It took me 15 years before I got published.
Yeah, my personal journey started at least 5 or 6 years ago, and I was a tutor of my next door neighbor, and he was fantastic in math and science, but there was something about writing even the simplest of things, short answer, long answer, and compositions. And so I had to bend over backwards trying to figure out a way to get him to put pen. He could stare at a blank page like nobody's business. So I had to do all sorts of things to kind of get him going, get him thinking, and help him to realize that he can do it. So I was doing lists and webbing and brainstorming and stream of consciousness and free writes. And I had always been an avid reader, but I never found myself to truly have the skill of a writer. And then I thought, well, if I'm trying to teach Luciano how to write, then why don't I give it a shot myself? And even though it was not gold spun on the page, I did enjoy doing it. But it's taken me many, many years, and I've only just recently published a short story that's 11 pages, but I edited the heck out of that with the help of a lot of beta readers, and finally got it, published. And I'm sure if you put that story next to the stuff that I wrote 6 years ago, they're almost completely unrelated. Like, I had huge issues with grammar and verb tenses and incomplete descriptions, or just you don't really get a sense for the character, the setting. There's not enough details in there. And those are still my big goals, but it definitely was not an immediate process. And I'm glad to hear that somebody as successful as yourself had an apprenticeship and had all those denial letters and ended up, really making a name for yourself.
Well, I always tell my students, we don't know what we don't know when it comes to writing. You sit down to write, and you write something, and you read it out loud yourself, and it sounds just fine because, you've got part of it in your head, part of it on the page. And then it's not until you show it to other people, and they say, oh, no, this won't do. Where is this setting? And hey, your head hopping. Then you start learning all this stuff, and what I see happening is people either throw themselves into the learning process and say, oh, I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't know this stuff. Or people get very defensive and angry and upset, and then it's not pretty. There's a lot, some online wars will happen, and people are saying mean things, and they're mad about it because they still don't know what they don't know, and they're not willing to go out and find out more about it. And it's just really critical in writing. It doesn't matter if you are one of the best writers on the planet. We all make mistakes, and we all have stuff in our writing. We all need editors. In fact, some of the people who I respect the most as just the finest editors who I've ever worked with, when they write, they're not perfect either, because that journey from your brain and the conceptualization of your story through your body to your hands or your fingers or out your mouth to a dragon speak naturally kind of program, whatever. That's not an easy journey. We just can't do this mind meld and suddenly the story is there. It's harder to tell a story than it looks. Everybody thinks, well, I just see it in my head like it was a TV program. Well, that doesn't exactly work either, because that doesn't give you the layers and the textures that you need. Mm-hmm. You need to put all the senses in there. You need to put people's perceptions in there. And we don't get that in TV because we're watching a character and we're seeing their facial expressions, but you've got to write down what those facial expressions are. But you can't do too many of them or you're gesturing people to death. So it's just kind of it's a harder craft than people realize. It's one that I think we just keep learning and learning and learning over the years. And I got the honor of editing some short fiction and a novel that Victor Banas wrote. Victor Banas has written somewhere in the vicinity of 160 novels since the Pulp Fiction days. Oh. Just tons and tons of books. And I got the honor of, he did not deliver to me a perfect manuscript. He delivered to me a really good manuscript, but I still had questions to ask him and clarifications to make and typos and a few misspellings here and there. And, even a master who has written tons and tons of books, they're not perfect either. Nobody's perfect when you're a writer. You have to have help. You have to have editing. You have to have proofing. And in a perfect world, you have some continuity person and the copy editing person who will check facts for you. We all need that. We all have to have that. It doesn't matter how great you are. It doesn't matter if you wrote one perfect book, because, hey, the next book you write is going to pose a whole bunch of new challenges, and it's not going to be perfect like the last book. We just keep learning with every single book.
I think probably why I came so late to the table, so to speak, I had to be in the right place emotionally and intellectually for constructive criticism. I was a very cocky child, and I didn't like to be edited. I didn't like authority. I had issues. And when I was in college, I took a short story writing class at elective. And I did not like the table reads where, people would read your work and then criticize it in class. I just couldn't cope with that kind of stuff. And that's probably the reason why I was not a writer from that point. And then as I got older, I was less hung up on being perfect and being liked and being flawless. Like somehow, not that I was ever perfect or even a perfectionist for that matter, but it took a lot for me to be in the right place to learn. And then this year was the year where I learned how to deal with a substantive edit or a hard edit where they really get in there and, for like the story, the characters, the grammar, the syntax, everything, the whole ball of wax. And then my hurdle was having the stomach for reading it and then using it to write. And it took me several months to be able to do that. And then I just got in the mindset, it's like, I want this to be a good product. I want people to enjoy the story. I want it to be a clean copy. And in order to do so, I have to be able to listen to what people have to say about my work. Even if it's critical, even if it's sarcastic or snarky or smart-assed. In the end, it makes for a better product, but, it took me a long-ass time to get into a place where I could handle that kind of criticism.
Well, look at all these young dudes who are doing extreme sports. Let's take guys and gals who are skateboarders, and they go into those skateboard championships and everything, and you don't think that they didn't drop down one of those sharp hills and on their skateboard and fall off about 400 times before they finally got the balance right? It's kind of like writing is sort of the same way. You write a bunch of stuff, and then people come along and they say, well, this isn't working, and what do you mean by this? And, hey, this is a dangling participle, and blah, 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 all this stuff, and then you've got to figure out what to do about that. And so if you're a skateboarder and you're trying to learn how to be a better skateboarder, maybe you film yourself, and then you start trying to drop off the side of this sharp cliff, and go down it. Maybe you're trying to do that in such a way that you change your posture, and then you film it again. Oops, splat, I crashed again. All right, I'm going to film my posture again. And sooner or later, you get it where you want it to be. I think writing is kind of like that, too. We just keep writing stuff, and it's not quite right, and you just keep working on trying to make it better. I also have to say, though, Liz, one of the things that I hated about college classes is that there was a high, what would you call it, kind of a quality of encouragement by professors and other kinds of teachers to be critical. And I think that there's a way to be critical that's constructive, and there's a way to be critical that is destructive. And most people that I have seen who have said, "Oh my God, I'm just going to be a terrible writer. I went to the workshopping part of the class, and everybody said a mean thing, and they did it with glee." Lots of times I remember people doing it with glee. "Oh, look, you completely screwed this up. This sounds stupid." And they literally judged your work. Whereas if you're in a group with people and we're saying, "Okay, we're all in this together." And you probably know this from the mentoring program with the Golden Crown Literary Society and with the education program. The whole idea is to encourage somebody because, again, they didn't know what they didn't know. And if you hit them over the head with a frying pan to say, "Hey, this is what you didn't know, you should be, you're an idiot," that doesn't help the person. You want them to sit down and say, "Oh, I had no idea about this writing style. Look, I had no clue that in my 100,000 word manuscript, I used the word just and really and truly and, a few other words like that 7,000 times. And then I need to go through my manuscript and cut a bunch of stuff out like that." I had no clue. But you could present that to somebody in such a way that they can go, "Oh, geez, am I silly or what?" And then, okay, I'll go fix that.
Yeah, I had what Jove did was she highlighted when I was using repetitive words here and here and here and here and here. She says, "There's a whole lot of metal going on here. You have to figure out another way to describe this." I was like, "Oh, you're so right. Oh my goodness."
It's little stuff too. Sometimes you can improve a manuscript immeasurably just by saying to someone, "Everyone in this book walks everywhere. She walked across the room. She walked over to the fireplace. She walked over to her friend's house. She walked into the kitchen." Could people either walk less in the kitchen? She did this and she walked into the kitchen. Or could we use some other words besides walk? And look is another word like that too. Oh my God, lots of times, there's just a million. She looked here. She looked like this. She looked over there. There's other ways that you could explain how someone looks or that they're looking. And it's funny, just little things like that. And suddenly your whole manuscript takes on a different tone because you're varying word choice and you're using, people are strolling, people are striding, people are, stumbling or whatever. And they're not just walking everywhere. So it's just little stuff like that. I have I call it edit reading. This entire list of things that I do to a manuscript. And no matter what, every time I write a new book, some new thing pops up. It's like whack-a-mole, where the alligator head just keeps popping up. So a couple years back, I know Brenda Adcock was doing a copy edit on one of my manuscripts, and she made the comment, "Have you noticed that you overuse the word reach?" And I didn't realize that. I did I highlighted it through the whole manuscript, and I realized that she reached over and patted him on the knee. Why can't she patted him on the knee? I was able to just cut out about 90% of all those people reaching over, reaching across, reaching past. But I didn't even know I was doing that. I'm in the process of trying to write this manuscript. I'm not focusing on those kind of details. And it's great when someone comes along and says, "Geez, I got so sick and tired of the fact that every other sentence, the characters went, 'Well, comma, I guess we could do that. Well, what do you think of this story? Well, Yeah. I go through now and I double check to make sure that maybe 3 or 4 times in a manuscript I'll let a character say, "Well," I know I say, "Well, I guess I say well quite a bit." Mm-hmm. But in manuscript, you don't want to read that over and over again. And even mainstream writers, I remember J.A. Jance. I think it was one of the Sheriff Joanna Brady books. Oh my God, I almost went crazy. Everybody was relatively quiet. They were relatively well versed in the topic. Everything was relatively this, relatively that. Halfway through the book, in the fifth or sixth time where she said it was a relatively difficult job the woman took. It was relatively, I screamed, wanted to write her a letter and say, please, stop with the relatively. She used the word like 15 times in the book, and my favorite was the relative silence. It was relative. What? It is either quiet or not quiet, which is relative.
Stop equivocating.
Welcome to the Department of Redundancy Department.
Yes. Welcome. I want to thank you for coming on the show. We've had a really great discussion on so many different topics.
Didn't we?
Sorry?
We went everywhere, didn't we?
We did. We're at least at the hour point, so that's why, we're getting to that place. But we covered a lot of ground, and I think that people have learned a lot about you as a writer, and I also think that people have learned about the craft of writing itself, which is instructive, and I think it's important, and hopefully something that we've said will resonate with a listener and help them on their path. And so it's always good to have that kind of interview, and I'm really happy to have had you on the show.
Well, I'm honored to have been on the show, and if people listen to this show and have questions for me about anything, about writing or about my books or whatever, you can just write me at lori@loriellake.com or go to my website. I entertain questions from aspiring writers and writers kind of often, and I sort of enjoy talking about writing with people and, sending back and forth information about writing resources and that sort of thing. I enjoy doing that. There's a part of me that likes to be a teacher, and I don't get to teach often enough. So trying to focus on writing, and so I like to teach people when I get the chance.
It's a wonderful gift that you give.
Oh, well, thank you. I consider it payback, it's kind of like paying it forward.
Yeah.
Because people have helped me over the years too, and it's really cool to see that nowadays people don't have to go through 15 years like I did before they can get something published. Mm-hmm. That there are avenues now where people can get help and can move ahead quicker than I was able to. So I really appreciate the people who helped me in the past. That was a very good thing.
Paying it forward is always a good idea. Thank you again for being a guest.
All right, Liz. See you around. I'll certainly see you next summer.
I know. Very exciting. It's actually this summer now. We're in 2014. Can you believe it?
See you in a few months in Portland, Oregon. Yeehaw.
Woohoo.